And now, your daily dose of debate, breaking news, and uncensored views. This is the Michael Medved Show.
And another great day in this greatest nation on God's green earth. It could be the great day when we have at least the beginning of the end of the war with Iran. Would that be another war that President Trump claims credit for ending? Well, if he ends it, let's see. The U.S. and Iran are apparently, according to many reports, closing in on a one-page memo that would end the war. That's what the officials are saying, what is being reported in Axios. The White House believes it's getting close to an agreement with Iran on that one-page memorandum of understanding to end the war and to set a framework for more detailed nuclear negotiations. That, according to two U.S. officials and two other sources who were briefed on the issue. The big picture, the U.S. expects Iranian responses on several key points in the next 48 hours. Nothing has been agreed yet, but the sources say that this is the closest that the parties had been to any agreement since the war began. What's significant about it is that they are putting off the most difficult area of agreement and the most important area of agreement. They're putting that off till after this memorandum is signed and the war officially stops. The most significant element that they are putting off is the discussion about Iran's nuclear developments, which, of course, is the chief reason that we went to war, to make sure that Iran does not get the capacity of handling or delivering, God forbid, nuclear weapons. Among other provisions, this deal, the one-page deal that is pending, would involve Iran committing to a moratorium on nuclear enrichment, the U.S. agreeing to lift its sanctions and release billions in frozen Iranian funds, and both sides lifting restrictions around transit through the Strait of Hormuz. Many of the terms laid out in the memo would be contingent on a final agreement being reached, leaving the possibility of renewed war or an extended limbo in which the hot war has stopped, but nothing is truly resolved. The White House believes that the Iranian leadership is divided, and it may be hard to forge consensus across the different factions. Some U.S. officials remain skeptical that even an initial deal will be reached. U.S. officials have suggested optimism about a deal at several points during previous rounds of negotiations and during the current war, but they have yet to reach even a tentative or partial agreement. But the two U.S. officials said President Trump's decision to back off his newly announced operation in the Strait of Hormuz and to avoid a collapse of the fragile ceasefire, that was based on progress in the talks. Behind the scenes, the one-page, 14-point memorandum of understanding is being negotiated between Trump's envoys, Steve Witkoff, a former businessman and personal friend of Trump's, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and several Iranian officials. This is both direct and through mediators. In the current form, the Memorandum of Understanding, the MOU, would declare an end to the war in the region and the start of a 30-day period of negotiations on a detailed agreement to open the strait, to limit Iran's nuclear program, and to lift U.S. sanctions. Those negotiations could happen in Islamabad or they could happen in Geneva, two sources said. Iran's restrictions on shipping through the strait and the U.S. naval blockade would be gradually lifted during that 30-day period, according to a U.S. official. If the negotiations collapse, U.S. forces would be able to restore the blockade or resume military action, U.S. officials said. Now, all of this looks like we are giving up more and more negotiating points to Iran than President Trump had previously hinted would be available. President Trump announced yesterday evening that the U.S. would temporarily suspend Project Freedom, which is the military operation to guide neutral commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz for a short period of time, that's in quotes, in a push to get a long-term peace deal with Iran finalized and signed. The president wrote on Truth Social that Pakistan, which has mediated negotiations between the U.S. and Iran, along with other countries, had requested the pause. During the operation, which began Monday, this operation being the Project Freedom, during the operation, which began Monday, American forces reportedly only guided 2 commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi departed for Beijing yesterday to meet with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, roughly 10 days ahead of President Trump's planned in-person visit also to Beijing to negotiate with Xi Jinping. President Trump, all of this going on at the same time that yesterday was a big primary election across the country. And the headline for Associated Press says, Democrats win big in U.S. special elections, but Trump reinforces hold on GOP. Well, how could that be? Because basically the two primary the parties have a different electorate in the primaries. And races in Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan bolster current trends, the AP reports, showing Democrats' momentum growing ahead of November's midterms, and Trump still holding sway with Republicans. One of the important things for President Trump, which we talked about yesterday, is the idea of getting revenge on 7 members of the state Senate in Indiana who didn't want to go along with his reapportionment scheme, his scheme of rearranging congressional seats in Indiana. And of those 7 Republicans he was going to punish, at least 5 of them lost. So it was a successful revenge mission by President Trump. The biggest test of Trump's power came in Indiana. They report where he backed primary challenges against 7 Republican state senators who rejected his redistricting plan in December. 5 of the president's candidates won with the help of an avalanche of cash. And meanwhile, in Michigan, a Democrat comfortably won a state Senate race in a bellwether district, the latest in a string of special election victories for Democrats. More on this and confrontation in the California primary, that and more coming up on the Medved Show. If there is, in fact, some kind of settlement underway between the United States and Iran that would bring an end to this war, that may be a more beneficial development than most Americans even realize. Why? Because there's a massive report today in the Washington Post under the headline, Iran hit more U.S. military targets than has been reported. Satellite imagery shows Iranian airstrikes have damaged or destroyed at least 228 structures or pieces of equipment at U.S. military bases across the Middle East. This is since the war began, hitting hangars, barracks, fuel depots, aircraft, and key radar communications and air defense equipment at American bases. This, according to an analysis of satellite imagery, the amount of destruction is far larger than what has been publicly acknowledged by the Defense Department or the U.S. government in any form or previously reported. The threat of air attacks rendered some of the U.S. bases in the region too dangerous to staff at normal levels, and commanders moved most of the personnel from these sites out of the range of Iranian fire at the start of the war, officials have said. So the war is not over. It's not over in military terms, and it certainly hasn't been negotiated to an end as yet, but we may be headed in that direction. Marco Rubio is headed toward Europe. He is going to meet, at least the idea is, with Pope Leo. But that's a difficult situation because Pope Leo is basically coming right out, hitting back at the president and saying the president is lying. Lying about what? No, Pope Leo did not, to the best of my knowledge, use the term lying, but he said the president is not telling the truth, which means the same thing, because President Trump has now said repeatedly that he disagrees with Pope Leo because Pope Leo supports the acquisition of a nuclear weapon for Iran. And he's never said anything like that. But he is apparently opposed to the war. And who will know how the meeting with Marco Rubio, how that will go with the Pope, given the verbal duels that are intensifying between the Vatican and the White House. Here is Secretary Rubio getting ready to travel, talking about Iran and Iran trying to test the American will and the Trump administration. This is clip 22.
The last one I would make, and it really is important for them to understand this, is they really shouldn't test the will of the United States, at least not under President Donald Trump. He has proven time and again that he will back up what he says. And if they test him, ultimately they will lose. The hard way, the easy way, the long way, the short way, they will lose.
Okay, they will lose. There's going to be a lot of talk about losing and winning as they get closer to some kind of agreement. With the very possible development that both sides have areas where they can claim a victory and also have realities that show concessions on both sides. Meanwhile, President Trump was in the Oval Office yesterday and responding to a question about Iran firing on U.S. ships and why firing on U.S. ships doesn't really violate the ceasefire, which the White House claims is still in effect. This is clip 18.
It took them 10 miles the ship was so big, but they respect us. They didn't used to respect us, but they respect us more than we've ever been respected. Our country now is the hottest country anywhere in the world. We had a country that was dead when we had that group of people that ran this country with their open borders, letting anybody come in from the Congo, from countries all over the world. They came in from prisons and mental institutions. We had a country that would have been a dead. If they won the election, this country would have been a dead country. Now we have the hottest country anywhere in the world.
Okay, isn't this getting a little bit tired? We have the hottest country anywhere in the world. I don't know, it's 71 degrees outside here in Seattle. And by saying the hottest country anywhere in the world, a part of what I guess he is referring to is the fact that there is so much strain between America and other countries in the world that used to be our allies. Countries like Spain and Italy and Germany, for that matter. I mean, really, now we are respected as we have never been before. Does that hold true for the 30 members of NATO? I mean, really, does would he be willing and answering a question to answer a question of one country that respects America more today than it did before he came back to the White House? I'm not I'm not sure that's true with Denmark, which still is worried about a grab by U.S. for Greenland, or Canada, maybe Venezuela. He hopes Cuba at some point. And now Iran loves us after we conducted some fairly intensive bombing in Iran. And they're going to stop chanting "Death to America, Death to America." I'm not sure that is going forward. But President Trump has good news for Americans on where it hurts most, or people are most sensitive: gas prices. Gas prices is saying that President Trump is saying gas prices are on the way down. We can hope that he's right. We'll get to what he is saying and what his economic policy looks to be for the immediate future. We'll be right back. And on the Michael Medved Show, President Trump was speaking earlier about gas prices, which is a sensitive subject for him and for the Republican Party generally. Certainly as we come up to the midterm elections, people are extremely negative about the administration's handling of inflation, and that's registered most directly in gas prices. President Trump says everything is fine because people are learning to buy their oil from the United States. Here is the President of the United States explaining why everything is actually going well as far as gas prices are concerned. This is clip 16.
So when I did this, I thought the market would go down 25%. And I thought that was a great deal if it did. If it went down 25%, I was satisfied. I said, because we cannot let these people have a nuclear weapon. They'll use it. We can't. I also thought oil would go up to 200, 250, maybe 300. And I knew it would be short term, but I thought it would go. I looked today, it's like at 102. And that's a very small price to pay for getting rid of a nuclear weapon from people that are really mentally deranged.
Okay, but have we gotten rid of the nuclear weapon yet, or we're still negotiating it? And the idea is what's happening is people are learning to buy from the United States. Do you think that the average consumer is aware of where the gasoline comes from, where it's been refined, where it's been taken out of the ground? I'm not sure people are that aware. And it's a lot to ask them to think about. Oh, it's frustrating. Here I am, I'm paying $5 a gallon. And but at least we're keeping the nuclear weapons out of the Iranian hands. I agree that should be a priority. But the fact is, it's unclear whether they will even negotiate that nuclear restriction, that anti-proliferation position, whether that will even be negotiated with this round of negotiations that's going on right now. Meanwhile, Kevin Hassett, one of the president's chief economic advisors, along with the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, and others, Kevin Hassett was on Fox News and talking about why you have to put the increase in gas prices into context. Here is the president's financial advisor, Kevin Hassett, clip 9.
And so the consumer is really, really firing on all cylinders, just like the corporate sector you're seeing in the earnings reports. And they're doing that because they have so much more money in their pockets. In fact, I had the head of one of the big 5 banks in my office yesterday going through the credit card data. And just as Secretary Bessent said, credit card spending is through the roof. They're spending more on gasoline, but they're spending more on everything else, too.
Spending more on everything else, too? Is that likely to increase inflation in the short run or long run? Who knows? There is still the insistence that we are playing a game here, a game of chess with Iran, and that basically we are just one move away from total victory. This was Lindsey Graham on Fox News about taking back the Strait of Hormuz.
The Strait of Hormuz is the only thing left. This has been a brilliant campaign by President Trump and our military. The nuclear program of Iran has been destroyed. Their ability to spread terrorism has been destroyed because they're on their knees economically. If we can control the straits, if we can take back control of the Straits of Hormuz, it is checkmate. This thing is over.
Okay, again, is that the spirit in which we are negotiating this agreement? And why is it that for most of the experts actually looking at the situation, there is no question that Iran has done far better than expected since the fighting began? I mean, remember, there was a belief by the Trump administration and by the president himself, he was very explicit about it, that the regime was going to fall. And he invited the people of Iran to take to the streets and go ahead and seize their own power, and that the regime in Iran would be vulnerable to total collapse if we knocked off some of its most prominent members. Well, we knocked them off. And they have come back, obviously, with more fear and more respect from the rest of the world, and certainly more respect than Iran deserves. There was a question to Marco Rubio. He did a White House press conference, actually, and he was asked about 10 weeks in to the war where we are standing. He explains that the Trump administration's goal now is exclusively or primarily just to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which is very strange because that Strait of Hormuz was open before the war started. So here is the Secretary of State, clip 19.
As President Trump has said, and the facts clearly bear out, the United States of America holds all the cards. There is no scenario here in which if they decide to join a ladder of escalation, they wind up getting the last say. But our preference is for these straits to be opened to the way they're supposed to be open, back to the way it was. Anyone can use it, no mines in the water, nobody paying tolls. That's what we have to get back to, and that's the goal here. Every day the conflict continues, however, our leverage on Iran will continue to increase and their position will continue to weaken, especially as the blockade really begins to bite in conjunction with the sanctions.
Okay, and then Rubio proclaiming that epic fury is over. We are now on to the next stages of whatever we're in the middle of. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Dan Kane also took questions from the press, and talked about what's been going on since the ceasefire was announced. How's that ceasefire been holding up? Here's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, clip 15.
The map shows the examples and samples of Iranian attacks against commercial vessels in the Strait, as well as the Gulf of Oman and up in the Arabian Gulf. Since the ceasefire was announced, Iran has fired at commercial vessels 9 times and seized 2 container ships, and they've attacked U.S. forces more than 10 times, all below the threshold of restarting major combat operations at this point. You can also see the group of tankers and cargo vessels in the U.S. blockade line, as I mentioned. As a result of Iran's indiscriminate attacks across the region, there are currently 22,500 mariners embarked on more than 1,550 commercial vessels trapped in the Arabian Gulf, unable to transit.
This is a very unusual ceasefire, in other words. And question to Rubio coming up. 10 weeks in, are we actually any closer to getting rid of Iran's nuclear materials? We will get to that and more coming up on the Medved Show. And primary elections in Ohio, in Indiana, and in Michigan, very crucial states for either the Republican nominee or the Democratic nominee to actually win back coming up in 2028. And yet, of course, first they have to win not just primary elections, but the general elections. We'll get to those updates coming up. But first of all, with Marco Rubio about to be traveling to Europe and to maybe still managing to have a conversation with the Holy Father, with His Holiness, Pope Leo XIV. Marco Rubio was facing questions in the White House and I got a very strong question asking him, 10 weeks in to war, are we any closer to actually getting rid and ending and obliterating, to use a word that the Trump administration used before, obliterating their nuclear capacity? Here is the question with answer from the Secretary of State, clip 17.
On the rising oil and gas prices, the president has said that this is a small price to pay for getting rid of a nuclear weapon. But 10 weeks in, are we any closer to getting rid of Iran's nuclear material?
Yeah, but look, here's the way to think about Iran. And this is what I described at the very beginning of this. What was Iran's plan? You have to understand what their plan was. Their plan was they were going to build this conventional shield where they would have so many thousands of missiles and drones and rockets that they couldn't be attacked. And behind that conventional shield that they were trying to build, they would then break out and do whatever they wanted with their nuclear program. They no longer have that conventional shield. Okay, we told you guys from the very beginning, and we're very consistent in this messaging. The operation that has concluded was going to destroy their Navy. They have no Navy left. They don't. Not a Navy. They have small boats and Boston whalers, but they don't have a Navy left. They don't have an Air Force. I challenge you. When is the last time you read or heard about an Iranian jet flying anywhere? They don't have an Air Force. Their missile launching capability has been substantially degraded, and their industrial base, their defense industrial base, has been severely, severely damaged. So their ability to build a shield behind which they could hide their nuclear program was wiped out. That's a very substantial achievement, and that was the purpose of this operation from day one.
Okay, but if that was the purpose of this operation from day one, and now their possibility of operating a shield, setting up a shield to protect their nuclear program has been wiped out, then why are we continuing the struggle? And why is it not easy if it's all been settled? The key point of conflict has been settled. Why is it not possible to simply acknowledge that and then continue? Well, but basically because they've had another weapon, which is taking over the Strait of Hormuz and wrecking the world economy, which is a very real possibility. Meanwhile, speaking of wreckage, there were primary races across the country, well, mostly in the Midwest, in Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan, that occurred yesterday. And the Associated Press reports that elections in Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan on Tuesday reinforced a picture that's becoming increasingly clear. While U.S. President Donald Trump still dominates the Republican Party, Democrats seem to have the momentum ahead of November's midterm elections. The biggest test of Trump's power came in Indiana, where he backed primary challengers against 7 Republican state senators who rejected his redistricting plan in December. 5 of the president's candidates won with the help of an avalanche of cash. Only 2, one is still unsettled, and one of the rebels against Trump actually won. Meanwhile, in Michigan, a Democrat comfortably won a state Senate seat in a bellwether district, the latest in a string of special election victories. And takeaways from Tuesday night: Trump took aim at 7 Republican state senators in Indiana who opposed his plan to redraw congressional districts to help the party gain seats in the U.S. House. His intervention mostly paid off. Groups allied with the president spent more than $8.3 million on advertising, an extraordinary surge of money into races, state Senate races that are typically low profile. By winning most of those races, Trump sent a signal to Republicans everywhere that they can still get thrown out of office if they distance themselves from President Trump, even as his popularity, according to the polls, is fading. Meanwhile, the Ohio races now get started in earnest. Ohio Democrats are putting their hopes behind Senator Sherrod Brown, who lost Ohio's other Senate seat to Bernie Moreno in 2024. And Brown easily won the Democratic nomination yesterday and will face off with Republican Senator John Husted, who was appointed last year to fill the vacancy created when J.D. Vance became vice president. Sherrod Brown has consistently done better in Ohio than Democratic presidential candidates as the state shifted to the right. Even in 2024, when Democrat Kamala Harris lost Ohio to Trump by 11 points, Brown lost his seat by only 4 points. He is considered to have a decent chance to actually win that seat for the Democrats coming up in the midterm elections in November. Campaign for governor is different. Republican Vivek Ramaswamy has parlayed his national name recognition, tech industry connections, and alliance with Trump into a record fundraising haul. He largely ignored Republican rival Casey Putsch, focusing his rallies and television ads on the general election, and he won the primary decisively. Ramaswamy will face Amy Acton, Ohio's former public health director, who ran unopposed for the Democratic nomination. She played a key role in the state's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and that state's response got fairly good ratings. Dr. Acton, is impressive and very telegenic, and this should be a very close race for governor of Ohio because of the likability factor, which, if you'll remember, doesn't work powerfully in Ramaswamy's direction. And meanwhile, special elections have swung almost universally toward Democrats since Trump returned to the White House, and the trend continued yesterday in central Michigan. Democrat Chedrick Green won a state Senate seat in a closely matched district where Harris and Trump nearly tied. Harris beat Trump by 1 point in 2024. It's just one special election months out from the midterms, but in a preeminent battleground like Michigan, all political D-leaves are carefully analyzed. The state has one of the top U.S. Senate contests this November and is crucial in deciding presidential elections. The race carries outsized importance for another reason. Shadrach Green's victory gives Democrats a firm majority in the state Senate of Michigan, while a Republican win would have deadlocked the chamber in a 1919 tie. The seat has been vacant for more than a year since Democrat Kristen McDonald resigned to take a seat in Congress. There is no guarantee the trend will continue through the midterms when turnout will be much higher, but it has nonetheless energized Democrats and spooked Republicans worried about keeping their congressional majorities. Now, there's also a huge election in California, not so much for control of the Senate or the House delegation from California, or for that matter, the Senate representation from California, but for the role of governor of California and the race for mayor of the state's largest city, which is Los Angeles. We will get to that and to more, and to a habit President Trump has of putting his face all over major buildings. Why is this significant? We'll have to talk to a guest about that with analysis on what is next in the political wars for this greatest nation on God's green earth.